Dursley is recorded as existing for over 1,000 years, as it was in the Domesday Book. It was part of the Berkeley estate, and it was said that in medieval times, land owned by the family stretched from Berkeley to London. The lord of the manor was appointed by Edward IV. Merchants had to pay a toll to the lord of the manor to sell at the market.
I used to do all my shopping in Dursley. Long Street was so different then. So many shops. Do you remember International Stores? Yes. That was a good shop. Durkin's, the ironmonger. That's always been there.
I was a hairdresser. All the older girls were being called up to go into service, so they'd take anyone on. My father would have had the shock of his life. I didn't have the guts to tell him that I'd got a job. None of my sisters had been allowed to go to work, but being younger, I got away with more. I didn't have a mother, you see. She died of TB when I was little.
TB affected every family, and when your mother or brother had to go to Standish Hospital or to the Bristol Royal Infirmary, you never knew if you would see them again. Some families even made huts or chalets in the garden for their loved ones to live in, as there was no cure unless you could fight it off.
This is a poem called Tuberculosis. Deserted, bleak hospital, cold wind is the best to clear those lungs or to kill me. Alone, nothing to be done. Antibiotics not yet discovered. Nothing untouched, feared unknown. Hacking cough. Isolated, crippling orphan maker.
My first manager job was in Dursley, and it was at the new International Stores. Does anyone remember?
Yes.
Yeah. We took £73 in 3 days, and then opened another shop up the road and took £840 on the first day. This was a massive amount of money in those days. Some people said it won't last in Dursley. I ended up being the manager of the International Stores in Dursley for 34 years until I retired. It was a family business. We really looked after our customers. We got to know them, their families, and their families. We prided ourselves on service, and they kept coming back every week because they knew we would look after them.
Do you remember the old co-op shop? It was dark green paint outside with gold lettering and a bow window. It was a different kettle of fish then. Inside there was dark burgundy and sawdust on the wooden floor. And there was a barrel of apples in the corner. We always wanted to take one.
We had to gear ourselves up for dinner times. The streets were heaving with people. Lots of the workers, especially women, were bussed in the morning, so they did their shopping in their dinner hour. People went shopping every day in those days.
And there was a very nice shoe shop that had lovely shoes in it. My daughter would rather have shoes than a doll and would stare at the shoes in the window. Once they couldn't find her and she was at the shop trying on the shoes.
We all had studs in our shoes. Shoes were really expensive to fix, but Father would replace the segs easily. They were neat little horseshoe shapes. We had to tell him if one was missing, and he'd get another hammered in really quickly.
I haven't read a word of that.
Trying to speak loud. My granddad was a bell ringer, and he worked at Mr. Petter. And my dad worked at Mr. Petter. and he was a bell ringer, and he did the clock on the church. I work in Dursley in the supermarket, and still do now.
There was some good quality shops in Dursley. There was quite a lot of money around then. The power station brought money into Dursley and people willing to spend it.
I was a humble clerk at Berkeley Power Station, and part of my job was to take readings on the amateurs. That's when I met my husband. He was such a good man and always so romantic.
When I was 8 or 9, we moved to Dursley. We used to be able to go on up to the hill through the woods. Our garden was really big and had a very big vegetable garden and an orchard. We'd crawl along the brick wall and then we'd race back to school.
In 1966, we joined up with the infant school, and for the last 10 years of teaching, I was at Highfield School up the hill. The children loved it there. There was so much space, a lovely space to play.
My brother used to get hit with the cane. The girls didn't get the cane. I would cringe when he was hit.
My mother wanted to be a teacher, but she couldn't. But she used to help out in school in Oxenhall. I moved to Dursley in 1945 to teach. Did I marry? No.
Why not?
No one asked me. We had a dairy farm. We had to carry the milk churns across the field. Well, not us. They were too heavy. Women didn't carry them. But Dad let us have the milk for the tea rooms. We'd run across the fields if we needed milk. It was often warm. I don't like warm milk. I don't like the taste of it. But it was good cold. The cows were all hand-milked, so it took a really long time.
We lived in Dursley and used to run and chase each other and play hopscotch. We used to go on picnics. We'd climb up Stinchcombe Hill. We'd make a fire and take a kettle. We'd collect all the firewood on the way up and make a fire in the quarry. We'd have a proper meal there. We used to get water from Mrs. Gabb. She lived at the top. It was always a lot of work carrying the kettle from the house we could see at Campee. On Good Friday, we could always see the people on Campee. We could see them nice and plain, especially on a good day. I didn't like carrying the kettle, you know.
This is a poem called Breakheart Kettle. I can see my world high above factory roofs. The air is clear here. Kettles clanked against my legs. Sausages spit. Water boils. Rattles against the stones. From my wedge of cake, I pick out swollen currants, the crow's nest of life, where flavours are so intense, joy of arms outstretched, running, whilst he, strong and dark, sits brewing.
When the railways came here in 1844, the main line initially bypassed Dursley, but a 2-mile branch line was built in 1856, with 2 stops at Cam and the terminus at Dursley. The railway station eventually was completely surrounded by Lister's plant, although the last passenger train ran through in 1967. It remained a goods line until the 1970s. There were huge sidings, and Listers continued to take over land in the valley bottom towards Cam.
The Prince of Wales pub was by the Barclay Road railway station. In those days, the trains went as far as Shatness, and then across the River Severn to Lydney. The bridge was the Severn Railway Bridge, which was destroyed on a foggy day when 2 tankers crashed into it. People used the service to go to work in Dursley at Lister's and all the other factories, and these people came from the Forest of Dean. The Barclay railway station was also used to transport livestock. There was a livestock market just opposite the pub by the station. It's still there if you look carefully. It is alleged that Brunel designed it. The pub, which was called The Bridge, only got its name changed when the Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, dropped in for a drink with a friend, and the landlord discussed how he really wanted a better name for it. So the Prince of Wales said, "Well, name it after me."
Coal was delivered to Coley Junction. My dad employed someone to collect the coal in lorries, and Bill, he used to come up to work on a bicycle and then drive the coal lorry. There was a regular lorry that went between Dursley and Gloucester. It was really good for delivering packages. I remember one time 2 brand new bicycles arrived on Uncle's lorry, and we wondered who was going to get them. A couple of youngsters who lived down through Slimbridge came to school on their beautiful new bikes.
I didn't use a bus much. I went on my bike to work. I remember when we all turned out at the end of the day, it would be a stream of bikes. There were very few cars in those days, not like now. But before I finished work, everyone was driving cars.
Longstreet was a hive of activity. Maudsley's, Bimax, Lister's. It was a real industry town. At 4:30, everyone left. We'd all have to wait for all the cars to come out, and Longstreet was chock-a-block.
In the war, they used the workhouse for the troops. Do you remember? The poor old dears were pushed out. I don't know where they went. It was the medical corps. Then, suddenly, they all went to Dunkirk. Do you remember all the songs we used to sing in the war? There was always singing. Church choir, at festivities, Christmas. Those songs really take me back.
Every winding street in Mayfair falls beneath the spell
being built before the war started. US troops lived there for a few months before they went to Dunkirk. I remember some of them used to come to church, and at Christmas time they'd come and sing American carols, and their chaplain came and took some services for us as well.
On Good Friday, the youth groups attached to the churches in Dursley would organise a procession. I remember in 1967 the church groups got together to do something different, have an adventure. They made a cross from old telegraph poles, and on Maundy Thursday they carried it up Camp Peak. It's very steep. It's now become a tradition.
After school, we'd run down the field and on to the Lister's land.
I started at Lister's in 1998. Our duty was to collect up all the dirty overalls. We'd pile the overalls into blue fabric bags with cage on wheels, must have been about 5.5 feet high. There was a lot of walking between sites, to engineering, the foundry. On a Wednesday morning, the van came in with all the clean ones, and on Thursday, we'd put them out. The first girl I worked with liked to walk around the edges of the site, which meant we'd walk a lot longer route. The second one wanted the shortest route. Usually there were 2 of us. I remember one girl worked with me for 3 years, but then she left, and I had to do it all on my own for a while. I had to do a bit of overtime then.
I moved to this area in 1946 with my husband as he became an engineer at Lister's. After my son was born, I worked there as well, in the offices. I did any job that needed doing. I suppose I was a kind of gopher. I didn't type. That was the secretary's job. I worked for 3 or 4 bosses. I can't remember their names.
The worst overalls were in the Lister shearing foundry. Seriously dirty. They had grease or worse. The foundry was grim. The red pots came down, machines were burned. The overalls were horrible. We wouldn't be allowed in there now. Health and safety and all that.
I learned the hard way about the boredom of manual labour. I had a summer job at Lister's in 1969. I was a mould maker on conveyor belts. I had to press one lever to make the mould go one way and another to push it the other way. It was fine for about the first 3 hours, and then my concentration started to go. It was a terrible, branching metallic crash. The big fat controller walked over and looked at me and said, "You've burnt it." And that was it. I was employed at Lister's for all of 3 hours.
Eventually, they decided to do away with the overalls and gave everyone polo shirts and trousers, especially those fireproof ones in the foundry. Our room we operated from was by the gents and the ladies. There was an old guy who took bets. Then they'd come in and have a chat. We just got on with it, and no one told us what to do or when.
Dursley was a fantastic melting pot. Because of Lister's, there was a huge population of workers, including many Italian and Polish workers who had been prisoners of the war and stayed on after World War II. Many of them worked at the foundry. In 1966, there were at least 3,000 people employed there. I remember the siren going off, but very regularly, but at odd times. 12:37 and 7:34, for example.
If anyone got married, They were covered in flour and eggs. But then, if they put the overalls in the lockers, they really stank.
Lister's used to provide lunchtime concerts at the Lister Hall for its staff and anyone else who wanted to go along. I wanted to go and hear Dame Myra Hess. I was the only person from my work who wanted to go. I was enthralled by the music. The concert was in the actual hall, and there were tables and chairs along the side where I sat eating my sandwiches and listening. The hall was packed out, really crowded.
The sunken cathedral. Can you hear echoes? Mute bells rumble deep below. Ripples of voices drowned long ago, forgotten when rain clouds cast a shadow. Feliz. The piano wishes for delicate tracery, first music of life. To cry and to smile are both confessions of existence. When the overalls didn't need to be done anymore, I was made redundant. I worked at Starshine Toy Shop, and when that closed, I went to the fabric shop, Inches.
There would be dances at the Lister Hall every Saturday, but we weren't allowed to go as it was something you didn't do. So we'd go into Dursley. My sister had access to know when the farmers' dances were on. We made long dresses to go to the big dance in Cheltenham. I remember a coach took us to Cheltenham, and then I could use the dress at Dursley. The fabric, I think it was rayon. My dress was darker than apple green with a black design.
I remember there was a plum tree. It was always laden with plums in late summer. I'd take them home. I'd eat them. It was really beautiful. The flowers were so beautiful in the spring.
One Saturday afternoon, I decided to write down every kind of wild flower I found. You know, I found 80 different flowers. Our house had its own well, which never ran dry. The water from that well was pristine, but we were forced to go onto the main supply. Why? The water came down from the private reservoir up near Cam Peak, but the property which owned the reservoir was being sold. After testing, Severn Trent Water said the water was purer than that came from the mains. I knew how pure it was. I used to make bread and I never had to add sugar to the yeast.
I must have been 18 or 19 when I started working at Vimax in 1993. I remember going out to buy clothes, a very short skirt and top. I felt so grown up. I had a Fiat Panda and drove it to work. I remember the really strong coffee we drank while we sit and smoke. Of course everyone did. I remember the computer screens, they were awful, black with green writing. There were lots of cafes in Dursley then. Vimax was a real family place. The wives worked in the sewing shop on machines making the covers, while whole families were there. It was an amazing place. When Vimax was taken over by Airspring, everyone just became a number. It was a real shame. We got on so well with each other.
It seems to me that employment ought to be more important than loads of new houses. Lister's was a big employer. In its heyday, 5,000 people worked there. Long Street would be closed, solid with traffic, with deliveries and people leaving the site. It's all so different now.
The Lister site has been mainly cleared now, and the river, that used to be completely covered has been re-exposed. Meanders and banks are being reinstated and developed. It's good to see it back again.
It was December 1968, just before Christmas. As we came over the brow of the hill and saw the lights of Dursley below, we knew it was a special place. What was really interesting is even though people have moved away, so many have come back. When they decide to settle down and have a family, it's a good place to do that.
Winter often made life hard, but it was still fun for the children. The hills surrounding the town covered in snow, the roads so treacherous and late of no deliveries of milk or bread. Some of the cottages around Camp East had their milk delivered by sledge by local children. Do you remember the year the cars disappeared under a snowdrift at Drake Lane?
Falling snow blankets, invisible cars smothered, lanes overflowing, forgotten, non-existence.
Sledge to Camp Peak. Real smothered now, liberated cars exposed.
Herds of elephants charging across buckled roofs. No shelter against human force. Yes, we moved back to Dursley 3 years ago. Until you move away, you don't realise how nice Dursley is.
The community atmosphere. People are willing to help each other out.
I guess I like the trees and the sheep and how I haven't yet been hit by a car during the morning school runs. Look a little closer at Dursley and you will find artisans, musicians, skilled artists, craftspeople, all creating beautiful things.
Everyone gives a smile as if to say welcome. So friendly and helpful.